Jeff have your story to tell.
Yeah. You want to start out, Jeff?
Sure, mine's not as cool as yours. So yeah,
Oh.
I went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in Hollywood, and Dan and I learned very differently, and so working together on stage for so long that we did is sort of a miracle because um, the way I was taught was very much from a soap opera standpoint. And in that sense, I was taught it's important to be real, to personalize what the dialogue is, and it's not important to be exact. So you learn the scene, you learn what your intentions are, and you say whatever you want. So that
Improvisation.
well, not really improv, but you get the feel for the scene. So let's say you have 5 pages of dialogue, and it's about going to the grocery store, and you have 20 lines. Well, when you look at the scene, you say, okay, I'm going to the grocery store. I have these 20 lines. It's important to know what these 20 lines mean, but it's not important to know exactly word for word what the line is. So if the line is, man, it's really hot outside, and I walk into the store and go, woof, hot outside today, isn't it? Right? So it's and that it's from the school, literally and figuratively, of soap opera, because they get these pages and pages of dialogue every day,
Yeah, right.
and they have to go out and just do it right then with no preparation. And so the way they do that is by studying the scene, knowing what the motivation is, knowing what needs to happen in that scene, and then going out and doing it rather than word for word memorizing, like with cue cards, the script. And that drives people very crazy.
Yeah. Now, I know why it worked for us. Well, I can go into it with mine, but I did melodrama for 3 years, which is the exact same thing where because you have to interact with the audience,
Yeah.
the script, you cannot follow the script. You have to know, okay, as long as I get these two things done in this scene, it'll make sense towards the end.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Same. There's the one memory from school that I have really ingrained in me is that I was very ambitious, meaning like I was at school and I felt like, okay, I'm paying a lot of money to go to school at this prestigious acting academy, and I'm going to get every ounce of knowledge out of it. And so I would spend huge amounts of time at the library, like making copies of sheet music for songs that have nothing to do with my classes, and like just doing all like any free time. I would go to the library and just absorb things that were in this amazing library. And I just remember the librarian hated me because I was always in there and I was always doing things and I was asking for stuff, and she figured out pretty early on that nothing I'm asking for or wasting her time with had anything to do with my actual schoolwork, and she just hated my guts. Like I remember I walk in and she was just mean. So that's the takeaway from school that I remember the most.
Mean librarians.
Mean librarian.
Before I went to Ivor's class, I went to junior college and I took drama there too. But my basic learning as an actor came mostly from performing on stage, being in plays and actually getting out there and doing it. I think I grew quite a bit from the time I had that 2-year run when I started working with you guys, and I went 2 years just doing play to play to play, basically. And I think I grew more during that 2 years than I did during the rest of my life as an actor. This is by actually getting out there and doing it.
Well, like when at the workshop, I learned something which was important. I did the Telltale Heart, the one-man show, Edgar Allan Poe's, and I was really dramatic. When I break in to kill the old man, and at the end. But Ivor told me after, he said, some of the pointers, when you have a climax, you don't want to go too high before you get to the climax, because then you have nowhere to go.
Mm.
And
That's like when we saw John Mills in Pygmalion.
yeah. And he said, like, when I was talking, when I broke into the room to kill the old man, I was using a lot of emotion, loud voice, and he said, so you couldn't top that for the ending when it's when he goes mad, and he says, tear up the planks, it's the beating of the old man's heart. You couldn't top what you did earlier.
Yeah.
That was a lesson.
What did Sandy teach you?
Yeah.
Meisner.
Yeah, so I actually studied under Gary Kingston and Richard Pinter, who both studied under Meisner. Meisner sadly had passed away by the time I went to the school, but we learned the Meisner technique, which is a type of method acting. Unlike some of the other method acting where like it might be literal, like the Meisner technique's very focused on as ifs or imaginary circumstances. And the reason for that is that the emotional state that you need to get into for a particular scene, like you would call it emotional preparation, what you needed to get into that starting place when you're entering the scene might be different depending on where you are. Like if you try to conjure up a real life memory, that might affect you one day, affect you one way one day, but not necessarily exactly the same the next day. And so we would focus on as if scenarios or imaginary scenarios, which would then allow you to play with different ways to get into that emotional state, and also allows you to get out of them quickly. So you don't do like emotional trauma, but the basis of it is the reality of doing. So one of the things I think is kind of interesting about the school is that it has a set like definition for what acting is, and acting is living truthfully under a given imaginary circumstance. And so everything was based around that concept. But I would say both of my teachers would say that the method was there when you needed it. And so even though we studied the Meisner technique, we studied Stanislavski, other methods like Adler. We also, during our particularly voice classes, did really classical training where it was really just about it was very choreographed performance. And I learned a lot from all of the different techniques. And Jim, I think what you were saying is like, you use what you need. You don't necessarily something works for each actor, and you use what works for you. But I think what I came away from the school was, well, I had kind of a couple interesting experiences from it. One is when I interviewed for the school. I had at that point worked at a melodrama theater for 3 years. And the person that interviewed me said, it was the Gaslighter Theater, but the person that interviewed me said, you're not going to get any better acting tech training than what you've had there. And, I think, Jim, Tom, that goes to your point. It's like, it's the doing of it. It's the getting out there and doing it that really trained you how to do it. But what I really came out of the school with was an understanding of when I was connected to the scene and when I wasn't. Because so much of what we did day in and day out was connecting to each other, was being responsive and receptive to what was happening within the scene. It was a lot of improvisation, but being connected and responsive to what was happening in the scene and recognizing when I wasn't, recognizing when I was in my head and acting versus acting, being involved. But it was an amazing experience. I'd say it was 2 years, um, 2 years with amazing people, um, and really delving into almost every single day was improvisation. But we had voice, we had singing classes, dance. There was modern dance, ballet, um, movement.
Yeah, I had a ballet
Um,
class, hated it.
Some of the actors we talked to that got their training at the studios in Hollywood, you know, they were taught the whole thing, everything from dance to fencing,
yep.
to the whole gamut, you know, there. And there they got paid to learn. You didn't have to pay to learn, but
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then
But
Spencer Tracy, he said before that the most important thing about acting is listening and reacting.
yep.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. That's it's. Yep. Listen and respond. What was it? David Mamet, the playwright.
Yeah.
He went to the Neighborhood Playhouse for 1 year. But you can see it in his writing. You can see that the one of the first exercises we learned was repetition, which was basically just repeating what the other person said, like respond, listen. And his writing style is very much like that, where you can see the response, the listening and response in the dialogue. It's just back and forth. It's a tennis match.